In the world of professional wrestling, there's always been a strange disconnect between the wrestling characters and the actual people portraying them. In no other form of media does this happen. People will often refer to characters in movies and TV shows as actor name's character, either forgetting the name of the character or just never bothering to learn it in the first place. But you will never see wrestling fans refer to the characters that they see in the arenas or on the TV screen in this manner. It would never be, Joe Anawahi this, or Oscar Gutierrez that. It's always Roman Reigns, Rey Mysterio, and so on and so forth. This disconnect, though, it extends further than just names. And with the advent of social media and the infamous ill-mannered temperament of the IWC, it's no wonder why such a focus has been put on the mental well-being of the people whose jobs entail them intentionally blurring the lines between reality and fiction. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a British wrestler who was an incredible servant to the British wrestling scene, always playing his part, always battling on, and always making sure that the next generation that he was having a hand in training never felt like they had to hide or be ashamed of anything. This man took his fair share of abuse due to how good of a heel he was. But in and out of the ring, he became something that all of us in the wrestling community can agree on. A hero. This is the tragic story of Lionheart. The British wrestling scene has always sort of simmered below the surface, always seemingly on the verge of a boiling point, but never quite boiling over the top. Sure, WWE started NXT UK at one point, mainly in reaction to ITV rebooting World of Sport Wrestling, but neither of those quote-unquote helped the scene much. The only way British wrestling was ever going to have a proper, brain-melting explosion would be if one of its many federations got its own proper television deal, and sadly to this day, none have yet. A lot of the big name British guys that you know today, like Drew McIntyre, Pac, Zack Sabre Jr. and Mariah May, all had to come up with other people. Those other people propping up an entire country's scene, being mainstays while those guys were given golden tickets to go wrestle in places like Mexico, Japan, and the biggest companies in the world in the USA. One of those mainstays was a man named Adrian McCallum, also known as Lionheart. During this research, it was hard to find anything at all in regards to Adrian's life before professional wrestling, with most of the stuff on him being from when he debuted on the scene all the way back in 2002, wrestling only 2 matches in that year. In his words, he was not ready for those matches. What I did find out though was that from an early age, he was actually scouted to become a footballer, being offered a youth contract by Scottish team Heart of Midlothian. But as you can probably discern, he moved away from football and into professional wrestling. While a lot of people at one point grew out of wrestling for a time before being pulled back in, Adrian didn't. He was through and through professional wrestling, even deep into his college years, despite some ridicule from his fellow classmates. He was passionate about the art form of professional wrestling and wanted into the scene despite the lack of schools available in Scotland at the time. But one day, he happened upon a flyer advertising one, and it changed his life forever. With those 2 matches in 2002, he would go on to have 14, 10, and 12 matches throughout 2003, 2004, and 2005, respectively, before his career would have a rocket strapped to it. He ended up making appearances for so many different companies like British Championship Wrestling, NWA UK Hammerlock, Premier British Wrestling, WrestleZone Wrestling, Westside Extreme Wrestling, Combat Zone Wrestling, and a whole ton more, including a dark match for the WWE against Justin Gabriel before a SmackDown show in Liverpool. One of the places where Lionheart would make his biggest impact though was in Insane Championship Wrestling. The Glasgow outfit would build Lionheart up in ways no other company probably could have. Everyone hated the Lionheart character. Lionheart once did an angle in ICW where he took a weird sort of knee-drop famouser hybrid from Kenny Williams. Lionheart would hit the mat and didn't move at all. The referee checked on him and pretty quickly it looked like this was a serious situation. The backstage area emptied and they tried to clear a path through the crowd to get Lionheart out of the building. Whenever something turns super serious in wrestling, whenever the crowd goes deathly silent. It's an eerie situation. You are there to completely suspend your disbelief for just that night, and when you're in that situation, you don't know how to act. Lionheart literally hadn't moved an inch when all of a sudden he kipped up and super kicked Kenny's head off, pinning him for the win. The crowd vehemently booed him. Lionheart was also a very prominent member of the PCW roster. Then known as Preston City Wrestling, now known as Pro Championship Wrestling, Lionheart would have huge matches for that company, including a massive rivalry with none other than wrestling megastar AJ Styles. In their match on the 1st of March 2014, Lionheart would take a Styles clash, and he would take it wrong. As mentioned in one of my previous videos, Brian Ong up there, I said in that video that you should never ever tuck your chin on a Styles clash. Well, Lionheart did, and as a result, he broke his neck in 2 places. Following the horrendous neck break, Lionheart would actually speak with British tabloid The Mirror, and he would ask the doctors if he would ever be able to walk again, with them replying that they didn't know, and he would say that that was the most emotionally devastated he had ever been in his entire life. But Adrian would walk again, and not only would he walk again, he would wrestle again. 378 days later, he would walk out in front of a PCW crowd once again for the Road to Glory 2015 tournament, defeating Joey Hayes, Martin Kirby, and T-Bone before losing in the finals to Bubblegum. Despite initially thanking AJ for the match that almost paralysed him, Lionheart would turn sour on the whole thing, stating that he was quote-unquote nothing to AJ Styles, and that he'd had zero contact with him following the incident. It didn't help that AJ then had a shirt up on Pro Wrestling Tees at the end of 2014 that said, "Cashing checks, breaking necks," with a red band stamp over the words Styles Clash. It was as if AJ didn't care at all. And to an extent, I can understand that sort of mentality in a way, because the Styles Clash is such a unique move. Intrinsically, as a wrestler, on every move you take, you have to tuck your chin. But with the Styles Clash, you have to do the exact opposite. And if you look at the footage, Lionheart is staring at the canvas until the last possible second when he tucks his chin, because it's reflex at that point. So you're left in a weird limbo. Is the blame on AJ Styles for using the move to start with, or is it on the taker for tucking that chin in the first place? And Lionheart wasn't the only one to get injured with the Styles Clash. It had happened to Yoshitatsu and Roderick Strong within the same 12-month period that had happened to Lionheart, and it had happened years prior to Frankie Kazarian on an episode of TNA Impact. Thankfully, no injuries occurred when AJ got to the WWE, although there was that one time that James Ellsworth took his non-existent chin, and thankfully AJ was able to pull the move enough to avoid injury on that occasion. But Lionheart did actually reach out to AJ through an open letter on Facebook, basically stating that the move should never be used because it goes against wrestlers' intrinsic reflexes. And again, to that extent, I 100% agree. But he even states in that open letter that the Styles Clash is a very basic, safe move. Even when you break it down and think about it logically, how is the Styles Clash supposed to even hurt? Like, all the impact is being taken by AJ. He's hooked your legs, he's got your arms hooked around his legs. The move technically doesn't make any sense, yet it's won multiple world championships. So, is the blame on AJ, or is the blame on the takers of the move? The hatred of the Lionheart character, though, it would continue. Even after fully recovering from a broken freaking neck. After Barrowmania 2 in ICW, Lionheart would enter a 6-way scramble match for the ICW 0G Championship, with that title being ICW's equivalent of TNA's X Division title. In that match, which was time limited, it wasn't a one-fall finish. You had to pin the champion, which would make you the provisional champion, and as long as you were the provisional champion by the end of the time limit, you would become the champion. Lionheart would enter the match alongside Joe Hendry, Kenny Williams, Liam Thompson, Zach Gibson, and the then champion Davey Boy. With less than a minute left on the clock, Lionheart would hit Davey Boy with a Styles Clash, pinning the champion with just seconds left on the clock and becoming the new Zero-G champion. In his post-match promo, he would say that winning the title was the biggest fuck you he could give to the ICW audience. He said that during his 12 months out of action, fans had been pandering to him, telling him that he could do it, he could make it back into the ring one day, and yet, when he came back, he was still booed out of the building. It was heel 101. If you're going to make a career out of being the bad guy, Lionheart had the blueprint down perfectly. He was a guy you loved to hate, and his abilities in the ring were perfect backup for his mouth. As mentioned before, crowds would endlessly chant, "Lionheart is a fanny," something Lionheart would turn into merch and would become a popular shirt that you would constantly see adorned by the ICW faithful down the line. But then something strange happened. Lionheart would begin a feud with Joe Hendry, and I've just said his name, hopefully he doesn't appear. Hendry was the man to birth the Lionheart is a fanny chant. In a dark match, prior to ICW Fight Club tapings in Manchester, the two were set to have a match, and before the bell even rang, the two were nose to nose, exchanging words before all of a sudden the match broke down before it could even begin. Hendry delivered a double leg takedown, which you're more likely to see in an octagon rather than a squared circle, and this looked like a legitimate shoot. People like Kenny Williams and Shaw Samuels entered the ring area and separated the two of them, with the match being cancelled as a result. The two would meet in the ring some weeks later, with Lionheart asking how many people in Hendry's entire time in ICW had his back, with Hendry holding up just 2 fingers. Lionheart was one of them, but he alluded to the fact that Hendry had been becoming more of a dick recently. Hendry says, "Yes, you have had my back, but what you did was unacceptable," going on to say that if he so much as mentioned anything to do with Hendry's personal life ever again, it wouldn't be a pretty sight. In the weeks prior, Lionheart would make comments about Hendry's girlfriend and family life that Hendry saw as disrespectful. Lionheart would say that the two of them had a match booked for Barromania 3, where he was going to show up and be nothing but a professional. But if Hendry tried anything like he had done in Manchester ever again, he would, quote,
"I will flat out stick a fucking blade in you."
And so, they entered for their match at Barromania 3, and very quickly this doesn't seem like your typical match. It's got the same ferocity that we saw in that dark match in Manchester. Lionheart had Hendry in the corner, was hitting him with a flurry of blows before running the ropes and hitting him with a pump kick. Hendry falls to the mat, and after doing so, Lionheart legitimately punted Hendry in the side of the head. The match was called off as Hendry was unable to continue. In the immediate aftermath, Lionheart seemed incredibly remorseful, even putting a hand on Hendry's shoulder as he left the ring area. At the next ICW Fight Club taping, Lionheart would enter to address what had happened, showing footage of the incident. Following the conclusion of the clip, Lionheart would say, quote, "So, as I've said, I've done this a long time. I like to come out to do my job. Having seen that, to be honest, I don't know if it's just me, but
I thought that was absolutely fucking hilarious."
The crowd erupted, but not with boos, with an unfamiliar cheer. He would remove his jacket to reveal a shirt saying, "Lionheart is a fanny." Lionheart would continue this promo, saying he was always going to come out and do and say whatever he wanted. Still a bit salty about Hendry being responsible for the crowd chanting Lionheart is a fanny in the first place. He'd say, quote, "That includes making comments about your personal life, that includes coming out here and being just that little bit better than you could ever be, and that includes kicking your fucking head in." He would also mention that he'd actually taken it easy on Hendry, saying that he'd threatened him with a blade but instead settled for a big toe right to the head. As a result, a match would be made for Shug's Who's Party 4 Night 1, an unsanctioned match. ICW was always contested under ECW rules, meaning that every match the company has is a no DQ match, and matches could only end by pinfall submission or referee stoppage. At Shug's Who's Party 4, there was no referee stoppage available. The two would meet once again to sign the contract for the unsanctioned match. Hendry basically said that Lionheart was just jealous that a younger guy was coming in and stealing his spot, and having more success than him by travelling the world and wrestling in more places. Lionheart, still sort of heel at this point, basically said that Hendry had been giving him little underhanded digs for a while now, and he was sick of it, and that Hendry would never take his spot in ICW. The promo culminated with Hendry saying that if Lionheart wanted to stick him with a blade, he'd have no issue in breaking Lionheart's neck again. The contract would be signed, and that was that. At Shug's House Party 4, bell to bell for almost 11 minutes, the two pretty much ripped each other apart. Hendry would enter second with a chair, stormed the ring, and the two got into it before the bell even rang. At one point in his career, Joe Hendry actually represented Scotland at the Commonwealth Games in Olympic wrestling all the way back in 2018, losing in the round of 16 to Australian competitor Nicolas Verrier. He would, however, win the British Senior National Championship in Greco-Roman wrestling in the same year. So this was a style that Hendry was pretty good at and therefore employed it during his match with Lionheart. But it wouldn't take long before it broke down. Both men using the crowd barricade to their advantage, battling through the crowd, which was standing room only by the way, Lionheart utilising a tope con hilo while among the paying customers, Hendry using a chair to the point where the chair was bent and buckled, but no matter the punishment Hendry doled out, Lionheart would still remain defiant. Quite possibly the worst looking table in history, a sheet of wood with legs attached to it, would be introduced by Lionheart. Hendry would capitalise on this introduction though, with a T-bone suplex from the top rope through it. Hendry would slap Lionheart into a rear naked choke. Lionheart would pass out with his arm not responding to the referee, and Hendry would be declared the winner by submission. But Joe Hendry, the local hero, would grab the microphone after the bout, and people began to boo him. This threw Hendry. It threw the commentators. Hendry said he respected Lionheart as a wrestler, but they were done personally. He wanted to shake Lionheart's hand and leave this all in the past. He extended his hand, helped Lionheart to his feet, and Lionheart would hit Hendry with a rock bottom. The crowd cheered again. This flabbergasted Lionheart and the commentators, and a new chant would be born. Lionheart is a hero.
Comes down to, listen to this, Lionheart is a hero. I don't think he can believe it.
A major shift had just occurred. Even in defeat, Lionheart became undeniable. From here, he would continue wrestling all over the place, with the biggest night of his career taking place at ICW Fear and Loathing 11 at the SSE Hydro in front of 2,000 people. Lionheart would take on Jackie Polo for the ICW World Heavyweight Championship. Jackie Polo was also a mainstay in ICW, wrestling in a tag team with Mark Coffey at one point, known as Polo Promotions. But he vanished one day, returning as a Texan cowboy, speaking in the accent and everything, and now known as Just Justice. Justice's gimmick at the time was bounties. No, not the chocolate, but if anyone would be willing to pay for the right to face him, he'd face them, winning every time. But when Lionheart said he wanted his ICW title, Justice would reply that there wasn't enough money in the world for that to happen. So Lionheart returned with an offer that Justice simply couldn't refuse. The ICW Championship versus Lionheart's career. Prior to this, Lionheart had already beaten Just Justice at Shug's House Party 5, leading Lionheart and the crowd to believe that this was Lionheart's time. Justice would acknowledge this, saying yes, he'd beat him before, but he'd never beaten Jackie Polo. And with that, he grabbed one of his cowboy boots and, hardstyle, busted Lionheart wide open. At Fear and Loathing 11, the pair would meet. This wasn't your standard grapplefest. It was brawly, it was vicious, and it was what it needed to be. It was a fight with everything on the line. Lionheart almost had the match won in under 3 minutes, if not for Justice's manager, Coach Tripp. From there, Justice would methodically pick Lionheart apart for the next 10 minutes, with a lot of little shots with a few big moves peppered in, like a vicious shoulder breaker, a Rings of Saturn submission, whipping Lionheart with a leather belt and even choking him with it. Lionheart would fight back, taking out Tripp in the process and delivering a huge superplex to Justice. Lionheart would go up to the top rope and deliver 2 frog splashes, Lionheart's top rope finisher, and Justice would kick out of both. In response, Lionheart would go under the ring and fish out a polo mallet. He'd take it into the ring and handed it to Justice Jackie Polo. A moment later, Lionheart would super kick the polo mallet in half, hitting Jackie in the process, followed by a second, then a rock bottom named a Urafani, a play on words of Uranagi, and put the exclamation point on the match with a 4th frog splash to finally claim the World Heavyweight Championship in the 19-minute main event. From training at the age of 14, to hated, to fearing he'd never walk again, to going to the top of British wrestling and being cheered by the Scottish audience, Lionheart's story in the ring was, for lack of a better term, insane. And while he would be known as a hero in the ring, he would also be known as a hero outside of it. Just over a month after Fear and Loathing 11, on the 6th of January 2019, a neighbouring house to Adrian caught fire. Adrian, thinking nothing of himself and everything of his neighbours, attempted to help. As he looked up, a 22-year-old man was hanging out of an upper floor window. Adrian yelled up at him to jump. Adrian caught the lad, becoming aware that there was still someone else inside. He attempted to get into the house through the front door. He tried breaking the door down, relentlessly smashing into it, but the heat was too intense. He still tried though, and the door didn't budge. He could hear 18-year-old Natalie Merry screaming inside, but there was nothing he could do, and she tragically passed away in the blaze. Professionally, Adrian Lionheart would defend his title 7 times against the likes of Shigehiro Iri, Jody Fleisch, Angelico, Mark Coffey, Ashton Smith, and Rampage Brown. Along the way, he would win the Scottish Wrestling Alliance's Scottish Heavyweight title before claiming the European Heavyweight title, a title that is and was used by and recognised by over 25 wrestling promotions across Europe, in a title versus title match against Alexander Dean at ICW Fight Club 130 on the 16th of June 2019. On the 19th of June 2019, at 7:40 AM, Lionheart would tweet the following passage. "One day you will eat your last meal. You will smell your last flower. You will hug your friend for the last time. You might not know it's the last time. That's why you must do everything you love, with passion." A direct quote from the Ricky Gervais television show, Afterlife. Hours later, Adrian McCallum would take his own life at the age of just 36. Further details surrounding his death have never been made public. Adrian himself was a huge advocate for mental health awareness, mentoring younger wrestlers at the Glasgow Pro Wrestling Asylum training school and in general, often being open about his own struggles with mental health. It's really not hard to imagine that the death of Natalie Merry, for lack of a better term, haunted him. And so one day, he made a decision, and that decision became a permanent one. The outpouring of heartbreak rippled through the industry. ICW would tweet, "We are heartbroken to learn of the tragic death of ICW World Heavyweight Champion Adrian Lionheart McCallum. Adrian was a mainstay of ICW and British professional wrestling. Most importantly, he was our friend. His passing leaves a huge hole in the lives of those who knew him." Grado, another Scottish mainstay, tweeted, "Love you, my brother. The champ. R.I.P. Lionheart. We will never forget you. Thank you for everything you've done for the British wrestling scene, but more importantly, for being our pal." Saraya, also at one point known as Paige, tweeted, "Breaks my heart. R.I.P. my friend. You were always so wonderful to me, and I'll be forever grateful that I knew you. Give Trav a big hug from me." Trav being a reference to another British professional wrestler, Chris Travis, who sadly passed away from cancer at the age of just 32. Chris Jericho would post to Instagram a photo of the two of them together, saying, "Sorry to hear about the passing of Lionheart Adrian McCallum. He came to me for advice many times over the years, and I'm truly saddened to hear what happened. May God give you true peace, my friend. Hashtag Lionheart and Lionheart," referring to the fact that at one point Chris Jericho was known as Lionheart. Jericho would even donate £1,000 to Adrian's funeral GoFundMe campaign. The campaign had a goal of £6,000 and £18,099 would be raised. Drew McIntyre, or Drew Galloway as the British scene knew him, posted, "Sleep well, my brother. I'll see you down the line. R.I.P. Lionheart," along with a snap of the two of them in their younger days. The death of Lionheart is a sobering reminder that wrestlers are people too. Just because you see someone portray one thing on TV doesn't mean that's how they are in reality. People often forget that even larger than life characters, people who can be looked at like superheroes, have demons too. Even someone who was open about their issues, who felt like he was surrounded by people that he was comfortable in confiding in, because let's be honest, if you're not open about your struggles, saw no other way than to just end it all decades before his time. He became a hero in the ring, and he was a hero in real life. But he obviously didn't see himself that way. And the world is a worse off place as a result. Rest in peace, Adrian. Thank you for everything you have done for British wrestling. Thank you for paving the way for the next generation. And thank you for being a man with a lion's heart. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.